Well, good morning. Thank you for coming to the Treecovery Grant orientation. Let's see, I had 100% of our grantees sign up, so I'm really excited about that. I don't know if they're all here yet, but they'll be popping on, and this will also be recorded. So if you missed something, you can go back and check it out. I wanted to say that today I'll be sharing part of the orientation process, as will Kalaine. She's over there. She'll be coming on and presenting another portion, the tree part. And then Sarah's on here too, and she'll be helping us out, and she's providing tech. So if you're having tech issues, you can also send her a chat. She may be taking her video off at different times, to save her bandwidth on internet. So she'll still be on there. And then also we have a guest, Julia's here from CAL FIRE, as well as Ashley from Autonomy. Julie is who we submit, CAL FIRE is who we submit, who this grant is through, and then Autonomy is helping us with our accounting, and we'll be helping with the quarterly reports. So she's listening in and meeting some of you guys. So thanks for your patience as I step in and learn the ropes. Chuck led this program for a long time, and I've been working with him for several years on this program. So really appreciate your patience. We have 13 Treecovery grants, as well as a new urban forest management grant. So these are people who are starting their work in this particular quarter. So we want to make sure everyone's up to speed in time for reporting. I do not have Chuck's wit and humor, although we've kept some of it in the slides. So, but for those of you who really liked his references to 80s rock and movies, I do not have that either. So there will not be trivia in this particular presentation. I will say that I worked on the ground with grants as a Relief Network member. And so I think I have a little bit of insight into what kind of information and when to pull it together that will help you with your reporting. So you'll see here when you look at the order of the presentation, it's a little bit different. We're not starting with the biggest thing first. We're starting with kind of the order of how you should be doing the report and how you should be compiling the information. So this is what we're going to go through today. It is a lot of information. I will tell you that now. And you may feel like your head is spinning, but please remember that our goal is to provide you a hand. We all agree that these projects are amazing, that all the work that's going on is bigger than we can capture in these reports, but the report's the only way that we can communicate that with us. So please, try to understand why the reporting is important, and enter it with that this is how we learn about your project and how we share it with CAL FIRE and then with the general public, and then how we make these positive impacts into our community. So I'm going to let Sarah tell you a little bit about the Treecovery program, as she wrote this grant application with Chuck.
Yeah, thank you. So Chuck and I wrote this application in the spring of 2020. So it was just as COVID was hitting and we were starting to see the impact on communities. So we had a focus of capacity rebuilding, we called it, and really wanted it to support your communities coming out of COVID and also your organizations, because COVID was hard on nonprofits. So for that, we prioritized projects that created and maintained jobs and contributed to a just recovery. So that's why you all are here. And we also increased the maximum percentage that grantees could budget for indirects and costs and personnel, because we really wanted you to make it beneficial to your organizations. So that's a little bit about how we formatted it. And then as we're going through, please tell us how we can support you, what resources we can create that help with that effort to help your organizations come out stronger and also your communities. And then that's going to be in the grant report too. We'll get to that later, having you talk a little bit about that.
Awesome, thank you. So, in our standard format, we would have sponsor recognition at the end to show you how to recognize the sponsors. I'm putting it at the beginning because as you start to think about your program and make plans for your signage and maybe PR, you're going to want to make sure you include the funders of this program. So here's an example of EcoSlow, what they have on their trees over in San Luis Obispo. This is the way they did their funder recognition. Acknowledgements is required. It's in your contract, it's in the grant guidelines, and it's just a really great way to keep this funding for this type of funding sources available. We'll be providing you with these logos. So you'll be the California Climate Investments, CAL FIRE, California Relief, and then always include your logo in anything that you do, as well as any other sponsors that you may have if you're getting donations from a local group. And also this boilerplate language will also provide you. I'll be sending you a document that has all of this information on it. But just think about it now, so that when at the end, when I come to the site visit, I'm always like, well, where's your recognition? And you're like, oops. Here's some samples of some signage on the right there. That's over in Santa Rosa. They did a plastic banner. On the left is over in Santa Maria. They used a mesh type banner, which is very economical and lasts a long time. The air is able to flow through it. And it's really nice if you can leave the signage up for a longer, rather not just have it be event specific, that if it could be at a school or a site for a longer period of time, that's great. And other groups do much permanent type things, but they usually work in partnership with other entities. So you do have a $500 cap on signage, but you could use the logo on other things, like in your press releases and flyers. I just want to give you a couple of big points about reporting that I want you to get. When you leave here today, you should know these fundamental things. They're a quarterly progress report. Whether or not you have activity, you need to submit a quarterly progress report. So if you did nothing, you will send in a progress report that says basically that a lot of times you do stuff. If you planted trees, you're going to need to submit the tree planting report, the MDCA. That's what Colleen's going to talk to you about. So that's something to think about now as you're maybe planting trees this fall, that you collect that data as you put the trees in the ground, rather than waiting to compile it at the end of the quarter. If you have expenses that you want to be reimbursed for, you're going to need to submit a reimbursement request, and that is going to be submitted to me and reviewed by me and our consultants. And I'll be going through that with you later. If you have match to report, so if let's say you had a meeting, you don't really have any expenses, but you want to report who came to the meeting as part of a match, then you will need to also submit a reimbursement request. It'll be really short, but do submit that information to us so that we can keep you on track. And then if you just have photos or handouts that you're doing at this time that you want to give us, in real time, rather than waiting until another quarter, you will attach that to your quarterly progress report when you submit it. So those are just things as you're planning the kind of information that we're going to be compiling. I can't overemphasize, this is a little bit of Chuck humor, that the 10th is not the 11th. Unless the 10th is on a Sunday, we will have it be due on the 11th. Your reports are due on the 10th day after the quarter ends. So that means January 10th will be, when you're going to be by January 10th is your first quarterly report to us. That doesn't mean the 12th. It doesn't mean next week. It doesn't mean anything but the 10th or the 11th, as he says in the first bullet. This is on your contract, and this is in the grant guidelines. So this is very important that you get that on your mind. And why? Well, if you think about it, I have 13 Treecovery grants. We have 18 urban forest managers grants, and I think we have 11 relief to relief grants. All of those we're compiling at the same time and turning around and submitting our invoices into CAL FIRE. So we don't have time to wait until the end of the month. Those are due the 30th, the end of the last day of the month following the quarter. So by January 31st, I need to have all of our information compiled and submitted to CAL FIRE. So we don't have the flexibility to work through those days on individual. Please start, if you have questions, ask them earlier. Ask them on the 7th or the 8th or the 9th. Just don't wait until after. So I hope everyone understands how important being timely is and asking your questions early. I see that there was something in the chat. Did someone have a question? Okay. So Oh, yes, I see Ron has a question.
I was just going to ask one thing while you were talking about the banners and the sponsors. Can we also use that to put our own organization information along? Okay, thank you. That's it.
All right, so Kalaine, I'm going to stop sharing at this point, and Kalaine is going to go into tree. I put tree reporting at this point because if you're planting trees, you should be already collecting that data. So let me stop share myself. Oops, there you go.
All right, can you see my screen and can you hear me?
Yes and yes.
Thanks. So we have Julia Gowan with us here. Amelia mentioned she is our CAL FIRE representative in charge of the data, and she and I have been texting back and forth just literally till 1 second ago, trying to make sure that we have the latest information for you on how to fill out this particular form because it's difficult. And I've invited Julia to please jump in anytime because we would be glad for her expertise. If you've done a grant with us before, there are some things that are different. Every grant, it's a little bit different. CAL FIRE is trying to get the form a little streamlined, and so I've made some asterisks by everything that that at least in my mind is new from before. So this is a very wordy, very detailed presentation, but my vision was we're going to send it out to you and you can actually use it as a manual. So don't worry if you don't keep, if you can't hold all this in your head. My plan was for you to have something to just follow along with step by step. So just let me take 1 second and say too that I'm an urban forestry consultant and I'm working with California Relief originally to calculate the greenhouse gas benefits for your projects. That's something that we have to report to CAL FIRE, who was the grant originator here. And over the years, spent quite a few years now, my job has expanded to helping with reporting and some other things too. So that's why I am here as a representative of my own company talking to you today. So let's dive in. Let me see if, all right. So the form I'm talking about is going to be in a packet that Amelia is going to send to you. And we've always referred to it as the MDCA form, which is an acronym for something that is basically no longer relevant. So it's an old thing from CAL FIRE, and the name has stuck even as what it refers to has evolved over time. So first step, my first request to you is please take this file, which has a clunky name. Actually, the file I'm sending to you is called MDCA for Planted Trees, your name here. So at the end of the quarter, I will get approximately 40 or 50 of these from you folks and people doing the previous California Relief grants. And half of them will have this same name. And I won't be able to tell which one I'm looking at. So I'm very grateful if you rename the file with your organization's name, and then please enter your grant number and your grant name there in the top line, and that also helps me keep everybody straight. All right, we're just gonna go left to right. So this is something that's new for those of you who've worked with us before. CAL FIRE would like us to please number the trees consecutively 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and on down the line. And the idea there is to help them in the data processing to make sure that nothing has been missed. I think there are pros and cons to this, but we're going to give this a try and see how it goes and see if it helps us to capture things that might have been missed in the process. So when you get your file from me, it's going to have the first 200 numbers filled in. If you're going to plant more trees than that, you can just drag it down and it will add more numbers to the list. If a tree dies and is removed, don't restart, don't take that tree out and reuse the numbers or restart the numbers. We want to make sure that every time you call me and say, oh, tree number 21 died, what do I do? We're both talking about the same tree number 21. So it stays that number from today until the end. So that is new and weird and hopefully will be helpful though. So number 2, the funder. This feels a little bit odd because this file is used by everybody who has a CAL FIRE grant. And so here in this case, California Relief has a CAL FIRE grant. They're passing on that's a pass-through grant to you. So sometimes I get these back without this filled in because people are like, I didn't get any money from CAL FIRE, but in reality, you did. That just coming through California Relief. So in almost all cases, your funder here is CAL FIRE, unless you're planting match trees or unless you're informing us about match trees that you're planting, and then you would choose match. I would say most of our grantees don't actually ever have to use that choice in the drop-down menu.
Hey, Colleen,
Yeah.
there is a question about the numbering from before, and
Oh,
that
yeah,
is if you have a previous California Relief / CAL FIRE grant, are you still starting this grant with one?
You are. So it's going to start with one for the particular grant, and you're going to always start with one in theory going forward in the future. When we get to the far side of this form, there's another column where you can put in your own number, and I'll talk about that in a second. So hopefully you have a better numbering system than that. And we've made it, there is a space in there for you. Okay,
another question on this page.
Yeah.
About match. If your tree is matched, you still put the CAL FIRE as the funder.
If your tree is matched, then this is where you choose match from the drop-down list. And what's happening here, and the reason this is kind of important, is because do you see there's like a little blue section above there that says planted trees for this reporting period. And to the right is a green one that I accidentally cut off. The drop-down menu here, CAL FIRE and match, feeds a formula in this blue right here, right in this little spot right here is a formula that counts up all the things that say CAL FIRE in this list and tallies the number of trees, and then does the same thing for everything labeled match and adds those two together and tells us how many trees you planted this reporting period. So if you don't fill these in, your totals are not gonna, your formula is not going to work. And that happens automatically, so you don't have to worry about it as long as you do choose your thing from the drop-down menu. Scientific name, we would be very grateful for the Latin name, the botanical name, the scientific name, whatever you want to call it. A lot of species share a common name, even if they're quite different trees, especially things like cherry. So it's helpful to me to know either you planted a cherry tree that actually has cherries, which is probably almost certainly a smaller, and versus cherry laurel versus flowering cherry. And there are even cases where the difference is really substantial. So if you're struggling with this, just let me know it as much ahead of time as you can, and I'll help you figure out what you're actually talking about. But once we get sort of in that reporting period at the like around the 10th, things start to get crazy and they start to run out of time. Street address, straightforward. The street address goes under street address. Your city goes under city. And then we have that column called other additional info, where you can put the name of a school, the name of a park. So, if you're planting a tree in front of a house, it's going to have a very specific number, like our number 1 tree here. If you're planting a tree in a park that takes up a whole city block, and it's like the park's address is 100 Market Street, it's helpful to just know that we're going to have to find that tree within a larger park. So I think that's a pretty useful field. Moving on. I see there's questions in the chat. Amelia or Sarah, would you mind keep interrupting me? Because I can't see the chat and my slides. If there's something that, that's important at the time we're talking about it. Ownership of the tree is really ownership of the property where the tree is being planted. So most of our trees get planted on public property. So that's any street tree, park tree, school tree. Personally, I count things like churches where it's a community space, even if it's not literally public. The private option here in the drop-down menu is something that we, in this particular grant, use very rarely, but it's what you would use if you were planting a tree on residential property. Okay, so now I thought about putting this towards the end, but I'm going to keep everything in order. This is when we get to the hard parts. So the X and Y coordinates, that's the latitude and longitude of each and every tree. So one mistake we see is that people send a latitude and longitude for the park, but this is our way of keeping track of each tree. And in fact, CAL FIRE will occasionally come along and give us a tree audit and make sure that these trees have actually been planted. And so they need to know where they are supposed to be. So I'm going to show you a couple of ways to get this information. But here, let's just cover the basics. For some reason, that's historical. The X, this really should be Y and X coordinates, that the latitude would normally come first. But here we showed CAL FIRE asks us for the X coordinate first. And you'll know you're on the right track if that's a negative number, indicating that it's west of the prime meridian. And for California, it should be somewhere between -115 and -123. The Y coordinate is the latitude, and it should be positive. So that's the one that tells us how far north above the equator the tree is. And for California, it should be between about 31 and 41. We do ask you for 5 places after the decimal, and I'll show you why in just a second. So there's a couple ways that you can find the X and Y coordinates. In the field, probably, well, I don't know if this is the easiest. It's an easy way. Would just be with a smartphone app. Used to be 10 years ago that, we had to fund expensive GPS devices, but now your phone does an absolutely fine job of figuring out where a tree is. We are not an Android family. I don't have access to an Android, so I can't tell you if your Android phone will do this for you, but the iPhone's default compass app, the one that comes with it, will only give you 4 decimal places. So you need to download a fancier version. Talk more about that in a second. Alternatively, you could do this back at your desk using a bunch of things, but either on the free side, Google Maps or Google Earth. So let's go through these one by one. Okay, so here's the iPhone compass app, and it just does not have, I don't have it set up right, but it does not have a sufficient level of detail to get the tree in the right spot. Don't use it. Here is why we are asking you for 5 decimals. This is where I used to live in San Francisco. On the top left, this is the actual tree, the spot that the tree is sitting on. And if you capture 5 decimal places, it puts the tree in the correct spot. If you capture 4 decimal places, the tree should be here, but it actually shows up 2 houses away. So if we come out there looking for that tree and you've only given us 4 decimal places, then that's the difference between the tree being in front of one house and not the other, at least in a place like San Francisco. So where did okay.
Elaine, do you have suggestions? Or are you getting to that for specific apps?
Here we go.
Okay.
Perfect timing. My preference, which is available both for the iOS and for Android, so both for all kinds of phones, is called Commander Compass. The free version is lovely, it's easy to use, and it's absolutely fine. We do want you, I'm going to go back here for a second and just show you what I don't want. I should have done this more carefully. So if here's the Apple app, and you can change these settings, but this shows you what I don't want this. So here's 37 degrees, 45 minutes, and 36 seconds north. So we don't want this format. We want the format that looks like this. So it's just a number with a decimal and then just numbers behind the decimal. And I think it's just called the decimal system. I mean, the decimal coordinate system, but I'm not positive. But here's how you get there on Commander Compass. And you should be able to change this in any app that you choose. But I thought I'm just going to show you how you get there because that's been a point of confusion too. So down here is the little gear thing that always changes our settings for us. In here within settings is the geo coordinates, and you see that it's plus or minus and then a big D and a period and an X. So that's the format and then it opens up for us all of these different varieties. And the one we want is the one that's at the bottom. So again, if you send me this one, I have to do this annoying, complicated formula inside of Excel to translate it into this. And it's actually easy to make mistakes. And this is also much easier to type out yourself. You don't have to put any symbols or anything like that. So that's how you do it there. But again, you should be able to do that on any app. One thing I should mention here, just going back here, if you use your smartphone to do this job, you need to stand next to the tree. So this happens, it's actually kind of funny how often, I'm almost certain that you'll see this happening. You stand 5 feet away from the tree and look at it and take down the latitude and longitude of the spot you're standing in, but you're actually 5 feet from the tree looking at it. So I always tell people to just stand there, hold onto the tree, and then use your phone and make sure that you're getting the spot that you actually want to be in. But an alternative to that, which is sometimes kind of annoying in the field, though if you're working with volunteers, this is actually a great way to get people involved who maybe aren't, don't want to do the hole digging or the tree lifting. This is a good job for people to have. So the other way to do this is back at your desk. And all you need to do to make this work, you do need a sketch of your planting plan. It doesn't have to be some landscape architect's drawing. This is just an aerial image of a school. I stole this from Tree Fresno. And they have planted a coast live oak tree here. This is number 111. So they've told me which species is which. They told themselves. And then it's cut off, but down here are the 222. And then this is enough to get a good estimate of the latitude and the longitude back at your desk. So but you do have to have made this drawing at some point. So all you're going to do here in Google Maps, so right in your internet browser in Google Maps, you click on the spot where your tree is. So I'm going to just go back here. So we had a tree sitting right across from what looks kind of like a 4-square court. See that? So here's that same spot. I right click there and then I get this menu and I click on what's here. And then down at the bottom, I think this might have changed a little bit, but you'll see it works basically the same. So now in this down here at the bottom, there's a spot that I asked about. And all the way at the bottom of the page is the latitude and the longitude for that tree, for that spot. So ideally, we will use cut and paste to grab these numbers and paste them into that MDCA sheet. Trying to type out 36.744639 is a recipe for making a lot of mistakes. So the less you have to read out a number and write it down, the better off you are. So cut and paste is your friend there. Okay, that was that. I see there's a lot going on in the chat. I'm gonna take a breather here and see if I can. See if I can see. Okay, so I had one question. The y coordinate is always the latitude and the negative number is the x. Yes. And so, and Julia's answering some. That's what's going on. Okay, I think we're looking pretty good here. Okay. So that was the second hardest thing. The hardest thing is yet to come. This is related to the hardest part. No, this is not. This is the third hardest part. Okay, so the next two fields I've lumped together, the census tract and the DAC status, which is the status of like, is it a disadvantaged community? So if you have had a grant with us before or a grant with CAL FIRE before, this map has been used before, but not all the time. So you want to make sure you're using the right map and the right DAC statuses for this particular grant. So I've added the link here on the manual, but it's also hiding. There's an instructions sheet here that you can also refer to. The link is within that instructions sheet there. So you can just, once you've opened this file, you can just click on the link within there and then you'll get where you're supposed to be going. So this new map is called the priority populations map, and it looks like this. All you need to do is put the address of your tree in here. So up where I've got the red arrow, you add your address and you hit return, and it zooms you to that place, and it's going to show you this tiny little dot and a tiny little window. You click on that little dot and a bigger window opens up, and then there's a little arrow. See, this is all very tedious and it's not intuitive. That's why I'm laying this all out like this. Click on that little arrow, and then here at the top is your census tract, also here. So again, copy and paste, cut and paste the census tract code so you don't have to try to write down this long 10-digit number. And then to find your DAC status, you're going to open the legend here, which is these 3 little bars. And then it shows you the different disadvantaged community statuses. And so we are in this pink and blue diagonal stripe section, and that is disadvantaged and low income community. So, and here's another 3 asterisks for our previous grantees to say that these categories are not the same as previous grants. They're a little bit different. So that's just something to notice. And here I did sort of a crosswalk. On the right is the legend from the map, the online map, and what it calls things. This is mostly pretty obvious, but it's a little bit weird. So the spreadsheet has a drop-down menu with DAC, LIC, DAC and LIC. Then this is a low-income community within a half mile of a disadvantaged community. And then if yours is not your tree, this particular tree is not planted in a disadvantaged community of any sort, then you would just put NA. Yeah. All right. These are easy. The date that the tree was planted, and this also often gets messed up. So Excel will accept any number of date formats that will work and will be able to be translated into this format that we have here, but still somebody will always put in something that ends up as text, like November the 4th. And then I have to change it all to an actual date format. So keep it simple, just 11-15-21 for days like today. The stock size is the size of the tree that you're planting, and that should be chosen from the drop-down menu, and this helps collate data, right? Most of the trees we plant are going to be 15-gallon trees. If you're planting some fruit trees, they might be bare root. We almost never, I don't think we ever approve 36-inch box
trees,
and very rarely approve 24-inch boxes, but you might have a 5-gallon or a 50 or a bare root tree. So the grow space, these are a little bit different from before. The drop-down menus options are new. So choose the one where where your tree is planted. So what we're talking about here is, what is the area around your tree planting spot look like? Did you plant it in a planting strip? So like a long, narrow grass strip, which usually has a sidewalk on one side and the road on the other. Did you plant it in the median of a road? Did you plant it in a tree well? So this is one looks a little bit weird because people used to provide us with the actual square footage of the tree well. You know, that's like a hole cut in the sidewalk. CAL FIRE requires that tree well to be at least 24 square feet, so at least 4 by 6. And then people were doing a lot of complicated work and actually measuring the distance on all sides. And all we really care about is it's big enough for the tree. So it needs to be at least 24 square feet. If it's tree well, this is your option. If you're planting it in a park or a lawn or someplace where, you know, there's nothing for no pavement or building or anything for 10 feet, then you just choose unrestricted. A lot of our trees, actually, I would probably say the majority of our trees actually would fall under the unrestricted category. If you really don't like any of these choices, you can choose other. Okay, this is also new. So for those of you who've had a grant with us before, in previous grants, we gave each reporting period its own sheet like this. So the next quarter, you'd get a new one of these sheets in the same file, and you would start from scratch and put that quarter's trees. And so we're trying something different this way. So it's a little bit weird, but it is important because again, it feeds into these formulas in the blue and green things up here and counts up the number of trees that are new from the previous report. So it's a drop-down menu again with all of the future months. And we're just going to ask you to choose the month you're providing the report. So if your first report with us, which it probably will be, if you plant some trees this quarter, then the reporting month will be January of 2022, right? So your first report is going to be due January 10th. So your reporting month for that quarter will be January 2022. And you can kind of see what's happening here. I rigged it so that you could see the differences. It's showing two trees planted in this reporting period, the fake reporting period of January 2022, and 3 trees total. So it's grabbing that October tree and calling it trees planted to date, and tallying up the ones for this future imaginary period of next quarter. So then the quarter after that, will be due April 10th of 2022. So then your reporting month would be April of 2022. This is not the same thing as the date planted. This is the month that you're submitting the report. Maybe I'll make that a little more clear in the notes there. And your tree ID, if it's different. So I personally am a really big fan of an organization, if you're going to be planting trees for more than just this project, of having a numbering system where each tree has a unique ID for your organization. Now you can do yours consecutively, but that would mean, you know, maybe if this is your first ever project with California Relief or with CAL FIRE or with anyone, you start with number 1 and you keep going to 247. And then for your next grant, you start with 248 and keep going. Now CAL FIRE wants that number kept separate, but I think it's really helpful for an organization to always know when they're talking about tree number 136 that they can go back and look and see, oh, that was the American linden that we planted in January for the California Relief Grant, blah, 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 and be able to keep them straight in your own record. So I highly recommend coming up with a system and using it here to track your own trees. Okay, and so this is the last and possibly the hardest part, and it's where we calculate shade benefits for the trees. So my original job was to calculate the greenhouse gas benefits. There are two kinds. One is the greenhouse gases that are pulled out of the atmosphere by the tree, the carbon dioxide that the tree breathes in and turns into tree matter like trunk and branches and roots and leaves. And I can calculate that from the size of the tree at planting and the species and the length of the project that we're talking about. There's a second set of greenhouse gas benefits that in hot climates, and I know we have a couple of San Bernardino projects in places like that, Fresno, Sacramento, along the Central Valley, basically in particular. If we plant trees to shade buildings, we can actually reduce the energy used for air conditioning. And that reduces our need for electricity, which reduces the emissions created at a power plant, right? So we don't have to burn fossil fuels to create power for you to run air conditioning if you've planted a tree to provide shade. That all sounds like, when I say this, I'm always like, that sounds so obscure and hard to, and not tangible. But in fact, in these particularly in hot, dry climates, that benefit can be as much or even more of that benefit that's created by the tree actually pulling in CO2 from the atmosphere. So particularly in hot climates, if you can provide me with this information, it will significantly improve your GHG totals and also will be more accurately capturing the benefit of urban forests in general. So what do we need to calculate the shade benefits? We need to know two things. We need to know how far the tree is from the closest building. And it doesn't have to be that, that's not necessarily the building that the tree is planted next to. Like sometimes it could actually be closer to the tree in the backyard, say. So the distance to the closest building and the direction from the building to the tree. So my personal preference for this is Google Earth, which is actually a piece of software. It's not a web, it's not on your browser. It's actually a piece of software you can download, but it's also free. And then, oh no, my arrow got moved. So this is the little ruler that lets you measure distance. I'll fix that before I send this out to you. So let me just jump back here for a second. There are 4 categories of distance. If your tree is more than 60 feet from the building, it's not providing shade to the building, and we don't care about it. You don't have to do anything. Don't even tell me about the shade. Don't even tell me where it is or anything like that. If it's less than 60 feet from the nearest building, then all I want to know is it's 0 to 20, 20 to 40, or 40 to 60 feet away. And the software that we use sort of pools things into those groups in order to make these sort of estimates. So you don't have to do a perfect job of measuring either, but you can grab onto this little ruler and then measure. So what happens is you click to the closest building and you drag your little ruler to the tree. And here it shows me that it's that little line of distance is 19.4 feet. So that falls into the 0 to 20 feet category. So again, you just choose from the drop-down menu which of these it is, and this is a note to also say, because it doesn't have to be that accurate, because we just want these 3 large categories, you'll probably can train yourself to eyeball it using Google Maps. You can also train your volunteers to learn, you can teach them their pace and teach them to pace off that distance. And that's, again, like a good thing for volunteers to do, to measure this distance from the tree to the building. The second thing that we need is the direction from the building to the tree. And this is very easy to get it backwards. Like, am I looking at the tree and going to the building, looking at the building, going to the tree? So what I actually put into the spreadsheet is this little sentence that says, the tree is to the blank of the building. And your options there are the 8 cardinal directions. So north, northeast, east, southeast, south, southwest, west, northwest. So we can look at tree number 245, and we would say that it is 0 to 20 feet to the east of the building. And tree number 324 is actually also is less than 20 feet to the west of the building. So this is, I think, much easier to do using a map or in the aerial imagery than it is to do it in the field, just because it is hard to get that orientation correct. Which, am I looking at the tree? Anyway, I'll make it more confusing when I say it. So the tree is to the blank of the building. That is basically all of the fields. Here are my helpful hints for tree inventories. As I said before, whenever possible, don't have people write down the numbers because it's easy to make mistakes like that. You can let people find the distance from the tree to the building in the field, but I think it's much easier to use a map to figure out the direction. If you're using your phone to find the latitude and longitude, stand right next to the tree. Don't stand far away and look at it. Measure the distance and direction to the nearest building, which might not be the obvious one. And practice a few times with your equipment and data sheets before the real thing happens, because then you'll figure out, you'll see the mistakes that people are making. And then again, please, please, please give your files helpful names that include, I should fix this. All I really need is the name of your organization. Julia and I were texting back and forth just before I gave this presentation, and she asked me to at least introduce this concept. So this won't happen until at least 2 more reporting periods away. But you're going to have to make changes to your record. Some trees will die and be removed completely from the earth, but not removed from this record. So if your tree dies and it's removed, we're just going to ask you to highlight it in red, and then we'll know to take it off of the main record that CAL FIRE has. If the tree dies and you replace it in the same place, then you can just make the changes. Maybe you change the species name, maybe you only change the date planted, and highlight those in yellow so that we again know the master list we can make changes to. Again, we haven't really figured out a good way to do this, but I'm just calling your attention to it. It's going to happen, but again, it's not going to happen for at least 4 or 5 months because nothing can change until you made one report at least. So this is just there as a placeholder to say, keep in mind that this time will come. And then one last warning and reminder. When you made your application, you included a list of species. We estimated the greenhouse gas benefits for those and decided whether to go forward with an application based on whether the GHG benefits were sufficient. And we got CAL FIRE's permission for a list of species that included yours and that tallied up to a certain amount of greenhouse gas benefits. So you're almost certain, many of you will probably need to change a few species because they won't be available in the nursery. You'll realize that they just weren't a good choice. But please do let us know what changes you need to make, because we need to make sure that the greenhouse gas benefits don't go down. And we're going to have to ask CAL FIRE's permission for those changes too, because we've got to balance pest concerns and drought issues and all kinds of diversity of species and things like that. So we need to make sure that that the changes you make are going to be okay in the long term. If you plant them first and they're not, then we're all in trouble. So that is it for me. I see yeah.
Can I jump in and just give like
Yes.
30 seconds of background about those
Yes.
highlights, because I know it is super confusing. But the reason why we ask for those highlights rather than you just updating your data and making sure they're accurate is because we are reporting at least twice a year our data out to our funding agency. And so if data that you've already reported to us were reported to a funding agency and now you modify them in any way, we have no way to know what those edits were, and we have no way to communicate them to our funding agency. So I would just say if there are any data that you have previously reported to Relief and you need to make changes to them, to do it either one of two ways. If a record has to be completely removed from the data, so let's say a tree died, you planted it somewhere else, you created a new tree record for that new tree, highlight that old record red, and then Relief and us and our funding agency know, okay, this is a red record, we need to remove it on our end. If any changes have to happen, whether a tree died or not, or you realized you made a mistake and you planted a maple and you thought it was a Chinese pistachio, whatever. If you need to make any changes to the data that you have already shared with Relief, no matter when it was, update that record with whatever needs to be updated and then highlight it yellow. And the next time you report, you say, hey, Relief, I needed to make some changes to records. They're highlighted in yellow, just so you know. Whether it's a tree that died or the GPS coordinates were wrong or whatever it is. If you need to make any changes, make them and then highlight the record yellow, and then Relief knows there were changes and they can communicate it to us, and then we can communicate it to our funding agency.
Thanks, Julia.
Mm-hmm.
It's still confusing. I mean, everybody will find it confusing, but that was helpful.
Yeah, it is confusing. There's just no perfect way to do it, and just the nature of the beast that we're dealing with trees is mistakes up. There's always mistakes that happen. Trees always die, at least a certain amount of them, and we need to figure out how to communicate those updates to the data. That's just the way we came up with. If there are better ways, let me know. But for now, this is what we're going with.
Yeah. So
okay, go ahead.
Amelia, can I just follow up? I see that most of the questions got answered in the chat. I saw one person said, "Oh, Ron, if you're trying to scare us, you've succeeded." I hope so. The point of the recording and my PDF manual is to help you get started. And if you run into a glitch, that is exactly what I'm here for. So it's, the earlier you can get to me in figuring all this stuff out, the better. If it's the 9th, it's not going to be great. But if it's next week, that would be, I have all the time in the world. So I'm here to help.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. So we're going to flip up. You thought your mind was blown on that. Now you get to learn and go into the financial part, which, is going to be important for you if you have been spending money and you need to get reimbursed. Your organization needs to get reimbursed. So we're going to slide into the reimbursement request and match reporting. So, wow, you spend some money, you have some donated time and supplies. We need to know that, right? So if you're going to be asking us for reimbursement, it's going to be due on the 10th of January. So you should be thinking about keeping those records on hand so that you'll be ready to do your reimbursement request. And these are the types of information that we will need. I'm going to go through each of these pieces, the type of information that you're going to need to do your reimbursement request. And I will emphasize, I do this for California Relief. I do our reimbursement request to CAL FIRE, and it is not something you want to wait to the last minute. You don't want to go scrounging in your car for the Home Depot receipt that you spend something on. As you're spending and as you're incurring this, these expenses, keep them on hand so that you'll be able to fill out this report easily. All right. And we will need, copies of all those things in order to reimburse them. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the reimbursement. For the reimbursement request is the receipt recording form. I'm going to be sending this out to you. All this information will come out afterwards. But the receipt recording form is basically that. It's a form to list out all your receipts, and so that we can track what you spent. And so it's really important that you put your name, your group name on it in the period that you're at the top. I asked for the quarter that you're doing it. We get these every quarter and we get them from every group. So, letting us know who's it's from is great. And we'll go right into the top section here, which is the personnel and contractors, which is where we find people have the most confusion. So this section is for anything you spend that is towards work being done, whether it's contractors or paid staff. So you can add lines to this as you need it, but this particular section is all of your personnel expenses. So if you have contractors, consultants, or you're paying stipends, those are considered personnel costs. If you're a nonprofit, if you're an organization that doesn't have any staff, and so you're paying members of your board for their contracted services, you're going to need to do something like this. You don't need to create timesheets if you're not paying staff directly. But if you do have staff, when you do have an invoice, you need to make sure that it has the dates that the work was completed, the type of work that was done, and the amount paid. It doesn't even have to be itemized like these two examples are. They could be written in paragraph form, but we do need to know that the work was done within the time frame that you're asking for the reimbursement, and that it's within your grant time, and what they did to help with the project. If you're paying staff, you got to get your sheets together. There's some Chuck humor for you. So we need to have the backup information on how you arrived at your totals you paid to those staff on the receipt reporting. So every organization has their own way of tracking staff. So we're not going to give you, I have another form you're going to have, but you send us what you have and write, highlight, circle, give us ideas on how you came up with this if you're using your organization's timesheets. And also if you're going to be charging us for any benefits as part of that, make sure it's clear as well that you have the backup for it. So here's just 4 completely different examples of what a timesheet could look like. What we will be providing you with is this form called a timesheet summary. And this is not a substitute for your timesheet. I have groups that try to do this every time, try to slip in this form and tell me they sent me their timesheets. What this is just a way that we can kind of analyze or understand what your timesheets say. So I have down here, these are by the month. If you're an organization that pays your staff by the month, then you're going to do these totals by the month. If you're an organization that pays semi-monthly, then you can change these. This is just a template. You can change. Obviously, you're going to change the name from personnel 1 to have more information. So let me show you what one looks like when it's filled out. Here is a personnel timesheet summary that has been filled out. So, you guys provided me with the timesheets for Dora, Bob, and Clifford, and you use this form to synthesize that information into a way I can understand your timesheets. So you pay monthly, so you have the time frame that you're asking for reimbursement was August to December because you couldn't submit. So you obviously have 5 hours was worked, and you can understand. And then this part over here is match. So Clifford did a little bit of match work for us, so we put that on here as well. So this just is a really simple form to show to take your timesheets and put them onto one page. And then those get translated over onto this. So if you can see Dora the Explorer, we paid her $450. That's what's going to show on this form. So that's where what I'm saying is I can, as a person reviewing these, I'll be able to look back and see how you got to this number on your reimbursement, on your receipt recording form. And then the match is also recorded on this. You don't need a separate page for match. It'll be on the same. And then also on this example, we also had, I didn't show you this invoice, but we had some donated, Acme Industries donated some time and work for us. So again, on their invoice, I would show these 2 items and that included in the personnel and contractors. Yes, Ron, you have a question? Oh no, you're just twiddling. Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
All right. The other receipts people don't struggle with these as much because they're just a receipt list. So you're going to, for your trees and for your tree supplies, all those things, you're going to list them under the correct categories, and you're going to list them by the vendor, not by the item. So if you bought, If you bought trees from a nursery, you're going to list this here by the nursery, not by the tree species. If you bought a hammer, I don't want to have hammer here. I want to have a Home Depot hammer, like, so that we can see this and we can go back to the receipts. There is a column on the left to keep, if you're a person who likes to be organized, you can number your receipts and then refer to the numbers over here. So if like the Home Depot receipt. So for instance, here, these receipts all have numbers on them. And then we could put that number 4, which was for some, a broom. We would go over here and we would put Home Depot under equipment, and that for that particular receipt, we could follow it. It's much easier for us. And I will say, I have to be able to read your receipt. Please look at your receipt before you send it to us. So often we get receipts that are either worn out or too big to be able to fit on a 8.5 by 11. There's just different things. So make sure that we can read the receipts. Just make this easy on everybody. Okay.
Amelia, we had a question about the original receipt. So these are some examples, right? You can either scan it or you can take a picture of it, right? Just as long as it's legible.
Yes. Yes. And I tend to do, what I do for California Relief is I take a piece of paper and I staple all my receipts to it, like, all my small receipts, and I do it all on one page. They don't have to each be on their own page. You could do on one scan.
Amelia, I have a quick question.
Yes.
I have a very handy software program called Harvest, which costs about $100 a person a year. Are expenses like that allowed?
What are you using? What are you using it for?
I use it to track hours and receipts.
It would probably be overhead. Yeah.
Because that's actually, I also wanted to ask about Excel. Like, we get a lot of people using non-Excel versions of that MDCA, but people can charge the software to the expenses, right?
Again, it would depend. They'd have to show that it's something they're only using for this particular project.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, because that's what the indirect is covering, some of those costs that you use for all your programs.
Got it.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's admin costs, which was some of the things Kalaine has. Admin costs are costs that we're not considering those overhead or indirect. Those are things you're directly billing us for. So if you did have to buy a specific, let's say you had to buy a tablet for you guys to collect data and you wanted to charge that to the grant and it was in your approved budget, it would be under the admin line. Mileage is probably our most common thing that our grantees have in their budgets. So if you're going to be, if you're going to include mileage as one of your reimbursable costs, we do need to show the backup for that, how you got that total. You can't just say, 150 mileage on your receipt reimbursement. We need to see what was, you can use Google Maps to calculate the distance, and then you would put it in here. And I wanted to remind you that if you're using the reimbursement rate for mileage, that covers gas and wear and tear in your car. So you can't do both of those things. I don't know what the current rate is I'll find it out when I send out your forms. So another question about match is you got to show backup for it. Just because someone gave it to you doesn't make it as valuable, right? We need to know how you got that. So here's an example on the left of a nursery that donated trees to a project. So they wrote it out. This was their supplemental backup, when they have down here total matching cost for trees, $3,154. So that would be our backup for that match. And then we would show that on this section of the receipt reporting as a tree match. And here's an invoice from a contractor that donated time. Again, it says in-kind donation total, how they got that total, what they did, and that would be their backup for that donation of $1,800 in pro bono work. Okay. A lot of your match is going to be coming from volunteer tracking, from volunteer hours. And this is just a sample sign-in sheet. You can create one that doesn't have to have all these labels on. It can be whatever you want. But what we do need to know on your volunteer sign-in backup is the date and the amount of time that everybody worked. So those are really important. We need to know the name. You know, some people may be privacy, just a first name can be on it, that's fine. And we need to know something about the location of where they were. So they will put their address on. If they just put a zip code on, that's fine. And that may also help you track a little bit about what communities are involved in your project. So I will send this the sample to you, but you can create your own. Whenever you send in volunteer backup, you just show us the math. You know, at the top right here, just say we had 10 volunteers times 3 hours, time the volunteer rate and the total, and circle it. I mean, just somewhere show me how you got your total, rather than you know, us having to go through page by page and figure out you know, how many people were there and all that. And one note at the end is, if you have a huge event, I know we had one grantee that had a one-day event with hundreds of volunteers. You don't have to send us all those sign-in sheets. I don't want those sign-in sheets. Just, I don't want to store them. You can send us a sample. So send us, you know, maybe the first 10 pages of that, or even less, and then show us the math of how you got up with your total. And you know that you as the grantee do need to hold on to that information, but you don't need to send that all to us. So you would need to have that backup information accessible if you were audited, but you don't need to send me all those hundreds of pages. Okay. So this is what a reimbursement, this is what the receipt recording form looks like when it's completed. So for personnel and contractors, we had a total of 1,500 directs, 650 for trees, we had all donated. So for each of these categories, we're gonna have our totals. And then at the bottom, we have all of our direct expenses and all of our match that we're gonna report. So this form is a lot easier to fill out than finding your tree XY coordinates for your tree. You're gonna list out all your expenses. Okay, so you got to send an invoice in to us. So you got all your backup together, you have your receipt list ready, and you're going to invoice us. So I'm sending you a invoice workbook, which is specific to your particular, it's going to have your budget already in it. So you don't have to do anything. This is really, really easy. What I do, if you can see down here at the bottom, there's going to be tabs on that workbook. Hopefully you're good with Excel. You can put it into Google Sheets, but you will lose some of the protections we have, so you don't mess up on it. So you just have to realize if you can do it in Excel, it's a little bit easier. But these are each of the time frames that you will be submitting an invoice. So you're going to be picking the December one for the one you're submitting in January. If you're not going to submit one in December and you're going to wait and do it in March, then you would pick the March one. So you're picking the sheet that goes with the time frame that you're submitting. There's a prep one, and that's what I have open here. See this yellow box? I need to know where to send your check. So this is going to be in a category. So when you get this workbook, I want you to go in and enter in your address and your name and your contact number, and that will autofill throughout the whole workbook. So you have to do it once, but it's really hard to process these if I'm not quite sure where to send it. And if it's going to be going to your fiscal sponsor, then add your fiscal sponsor's name there. Okay. And also when you get this initially, you can just look at your budget and your match just to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes when we filled it out. But this is the numbers here, and the total are the numbers that are on your contract. So we should be good here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the numbers that were on your reimbursement, on your receipt recording form, and you're going to put them into that workbook, into the white columns. All right. And it's automatically going to move them over and show where it's going to track for you. So you're going to know where you are all the time on your grant. Okay. And you're going to add in your indirect here. So your indirect, you don't have to have any receipts for. It's based on a percentage that you asked for on your grant application. Not everybody did the same amounts. So I can't say that, give you what that amount is. But this one I think is 7%, this particular budget, and they asked for 7%. So you'd be calculating that. You don't need backup for it. You should claim it every time you send in a reimbursement request, and you cannot get that without direct expenses. So you can't just send us, if you had an application that's for 2,000 indirect, you can't send ask me for 2,000 indirect with no expenses. It's got to be a proportion of what you're directly asking us for. And when you submit your reimbursement request electronically, you can just send me the entire workbook. You don't have to pull out a PDF of that for the purposes of the email. You can send me the whole workbook, because sometimes that's a great way to track, you know, where we got off if we aren't reconciling with you. If you're requesting a reimbursement, you do submit it both electronically and in a hard copy. So you are going to have that in by the 10th. And if you have any questions, you're going to ask me before the 10th. If you have any questions about how to do it, and you're going to submit that invoice, which this is the invoice page. You're going to set the invoice page. You can print it out with your hard copy and electronically send us the whole workbook. And you're going to send us that receipt reporting form with all the backup documentation for your expenses and match. So for some groups, it did a lot of work in a time frame. It's huge. For others, it's not. So it really depends on how much work you did. And the easiest way to send it to us electronically is just to scan it if you have access to a scanner. And you can even do those on your phone now, but just to make a PDF and send us all that backup information. That works. And just so you know, that document retention is 3 years after the close of your grant. So you'll want to hold on to all your backup information in case you're audited, or in case we're audited. We're assuming that you have all that, requiring you to have all that on hand for 3 years after you close your grant. Are there any questions so far? I can't see that. We're good. The most common mistakes we have on those reimbursement requests, and you can see that 1, 2, and 3 are all about supporting documentation. So, you know, we can't follow your timesheets and how they relate to your receipts. We can't read your receipts, or they're not there. There's no backup for any match that you recorded. Those are the 3 most common mistakes we have. So just look at it all before you send it. That oftentimes people will list their receipts by the items and not the vendors, and then it's really hard to go back and figure out to reconcile that you put things in the wrong categories. People like to hide personnel in all different places. So personnel goes in that top category, personnel. Even if they were doing educational work for you, they still are a contracted person or a staff member doing that. So keep that under personnel. And then miscalculated indirects. So make sure that that the percentage you use for your indirect matches what you used on your approved budget with us.
Amelia,
All right. Yes.
There was just one question earlier that was, if we do not have personnel, do we put match on the invoice?
Yes, if you have work being done for you, that you're not paying, you know, you're not reimbursing them for either as a contractor or as staff, then please do record that. If it's beyond volunteer labor, like not an event and it's actually pro bono work, then please create some kind of a invoice or a narrative that shows the same stuff, the days they worked, what the work was done, and what the value is that we can use, that you can use on the receipt reporting form.
That was all the questions I saw in the chat. If anyone sent them direct to Amelia, I wouldn't see them. So is there any other questions that didn't get answered? No? Okay.
Okay. Quarterly progress report. So this is the thing you have to put in every quarter, but we have it last on here because it's really a compilation of all the other pieces that we've talked about here. We have traditionally the quarterly progress report has been done on a PDF, but we're shifting. There's been some struggles with the new Adobe updates about how people are able to save and sign and send in PDFs. So we're switching to an online submittal, which will be easy for you because you'll have less you have to print out. It'll just go directly to us. You won't have to print it out and send it in as we had in the past. So there's 4 sections that you'll need to do the quarterly progress report. And I will make sure that each of you has a Word template that shows what those questions are. So you can mess around and have it filled out and then just cut and paste it into the form on here, and have your numbers ready, like, tree numbers and all that, before you sit down to fill it out. But your basic information is just going to be about your project, the data, which is your expenses and trees planted, and then some questions about the project. And then we'll have a place for attachments. Sarah helped us with putting this particular form together. So I'm gonna let Sarah kind of walk you through what this looks like on your end.
Okay, so when you click the link, it's going to open this report form. And as Amelia said, there's kind of these 4 different sections. If you're using that Word doc, you're going to have this info. You can have that typed in, and you can copy and paste it every time you fill out submit this form. So it'll be your organization name, your project name, just your basic contact info. Similar to the invoicing, you're going to select which quarter you are reporting on. And so that will just all be there. And then the next section is the data. So like Amelia said, all the forms that we've already talked about, you'll have that all filled out and ready to go. And so you'll know how much money you've spent, you'll know what trees you've planted, your numbers there. So you're just gonna take the invoice workbook and the MDCA info and copy that in here. So we talked about, this is just your funds spent in this period, and also to date, and your trees planted in this period and also to date. And we added a question, if you've worked with us before, we have a question about replacement trees. So that kind of goes back to what Julia and Colleen were talking about earlier, just asking if any of the trees planted were replacement trees. And then the next section is the narrative. So we're going to ask you a few questions about what you did during that period. It's a chance for you to tell us what you've been up to and hear about your work. And we have this question there about co-benefits. So you'll check boxes about what co-benefits you contributed to in that quarter, and then it'll ask you to elaborate on those. Something that's changed from previous grant periods is the census tracts. It used to kind of be one question about your census tract, and we split it up into 3 to make it hopefully more clear and simple. So the first question is census tracts where you planted trees. And so you'll again take that, everything that Colleen explained, that you'll have that in your MCDA form, and you'll copy that in here. The second one is census tracts where other grant activities took place. So if you're doing outreach, or if you're doing education events, you're knocking on doors, you're whatever else you're doing in your grant besides planting trees, you would put that information there. And then the third one is census tract served. So maybe you did workforce development and it took place in one census tract, but people came from a lot of different, the surrounding area. That would be census tract served. So that's your widest reach. People are coming to your events from all different areas. So, and you would put that in that third census tract section. I think that's all for the narrative. Most of it's pretty self-explanatory. And then the fourth one is attachments. So there's a place to upload photos. In the past, some grantees have put photos onto a PDF and kind of combined them to submit with your PDF. This, we're asking just to keep them as individual photo files. JPEG or PNG are 2 really common ones. TIFF, other things are fine. Just ideally not in a PDF or like in a Word doc or something. So it saves you a step, saves us having to take that out of a PDF. And also not all your photos, just try and find us some of your best and send those to us. The next is other materials. So if you have flyers, social media posts, maps, anything that you want to, press releases, anything that you want to share with us besides a photo, that can go there. And then the third is that MDCA workbook that Colleen talked about. You'll upload it in that third section. And then when you hit submit, Amelia, Colleen, and I will all get a copy with all your attachments in your report, and you will also receive a copy. So you'll have that for your records showing what you submitted. And then just going a little bit more into those photos, tips for great photos. Show us progress, show us what you've been working on. variety of activities. Like tree planting photos are awesome. We love them, but there's lots else to document, like education activities or meetings or just anything else that your outreach events, all of that. Showing the community, again, like at the outreach events, we'd love to see that. Before and after visuals, everyone loves to see a good before and after. So those are fun if you can remember to capture those. And then just some really, go back one more, just some real quick tips on photographing, like a real simple thing when you're using your phone and, we take our phones with us everywhere, those lenses can get dirty and that can cause your photos to not come out as great. So just remembering to like wipe off your lens before you take a picture can make a big difference. Also, when you're having these events, you're busy, you're trying to manage a lot. This is a great thing to delegate to a volunteer who will love to be out there taking photos and just let someone else take care of it. Getting low and close down to where people are planting trees makes a great photo instead of being up and behind people and seeing the backs of their heads and kind of missing the action. And then, yeah, just action shots and faces. And then we have some examples of some awesome photos we've gotten from grantees over the years, just bright, colorful, variety of different things happening, lots of people. So yeah, whatever you can grab, we love seeing those photos.
Pop quiz. Let's see. When do you need to submit a quarterly progress report? You guys didn't know you're going to get tested. 1, when you're submitting for reimbursement. 2, when work has been done on the grant, or 3, every quarter. Da-da, da-da.
Hold up a finger for those who have cameras on.
All right, every quarter, no matter what, you're going to be submitting a quarterly progress report. Thank you. Okay, so there's a couple of questions I think I can answer on this. The first quarter, your first report is going to be due January 10th. You can feel free to submit them early, ask questions. You can ask us and Colleen questions, if you have specific questions about tree tracking or census, figuring out the census numbers. Colleen's a great resource for that. And I know the paperwork seems so, it's dooming, it's hard to doom and gloom to look at all that stuff, but really it's a great way to communicate your project and, don't let that overshadow what you're doing. I will talk a bit about reimbursement timing. I know someone asked that. We really don't, we're getting reimbursed as well. So if you submit them on the 10th and then we're submitting them to CAL FIRE at the end of the month, it's going to take us at least 30 days to get that processed, sometimes longer. If you have, it could be quite a while from the time you incur the cost until you're reimbursed. So if you're having financial stress on that, please, communicate with us. But we do have to have enough money. You don't want a check from us. That's not going to go through. So we do need to balance that out. We can't just write the checks right away. We do have to get some of the money in from CAL FIRE before. And sometimes they take up to 60 to 90 days to pay us back, but we'll pay you before that. We'll figure it out. This week, you'll be receiving from me the MDCA workbook that Colleen put together. You'll be getting that receipt reporting form and the timesheet summary template, your invoice workbook specific to your project, the language about sponsorship, a sample volunteer sign-in, a link to that quarterly progress report that we just talked about, and a template, a Word template that shows all the questions so that you can fill out the questions before you go into the progress report to fill it in. And my last is these are just the common, you have our emails, probably the best way to reach us if you are trying to ask us questions, and then we can call you back with, be ready for the how we're going to answer your question. But as far as your challenges is share your story. So don't make sure you give us enough information to follow what you're doing, but not so much that we can't figure it out. So you gotta be a bit of a storyteller, that make sure your backup is that we can read what you send us. Think about, there's going to be me and other people looking through your reimbursement requests, so make sure that we can follow it. Make sure that those that your census track has the all the digits to it. No species surprises. If we get a receipt that doesn't have trees that were approved, then we won't be able to reimburse it. And the same with Kalane. We'll have to do a lot of work to try to backpedal and figure out why the species is different. So plan accordingly. Make sure that all your numbers match. That if you said you planted 50 trees on your MDCA, that's the same number that you report on your progress report. So making sure they all correlate. Keep everything timely, send it on time. And it's a horrible call. We have to tell people that we can't reimburse them in this quarter. They'll have to wait until the next, so that sometimes happens. Make sure you acknowledge your sponsors for the events, CAL FIRE, CCI, California Relief, and please send us photos. We a lot of times get those quarterly reports with no photos, and it's much more meaningful, and we feel connected to the project, as is CAL FIRE, when we see those. So, ta-da! I know Kalane has to run. Thank you, Kalane.
Thanks, everybody. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me with any questions. The sooner, the better. I got to go get my kids. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. All right, so hopefully we answered all your questions through this, and I'm sure you have more questions than you even can start to put together for some of you, but we're hoping that the process gets after you do this first one, I think you'll find that you'll start to get a handle on it. Let's see, match category is if you received match funds. No, anything that is donated in kind pro bono is all match. So it doesn't have to be just funds. Does that answer your question, Yvonne? Even if you get a discount, if you go to a nursery and they say, we're going to give 20% off, that could be considered match. You just have to show us your calculations, and you would split that receipt into those two categories. And volunteer hours, those are always the biggest match. And pro bono, if people do work for you, that's, just if you have a design person creating your sign for you for free, that's beyond volunteer work. That's actually design work. So you could put that up under a personnel match.
And I said in the chat, just a reminder for everyone, this is all being recorded. We'll send all those slides out. So this is a lot to intake and process, but you can watch it again later and follow up.
If you're working with a city, you only have to show a timesheet if they're working for you. If it's an outside partner, then you need to have something that justifies the amount that you're showing as match. So if the city is coming out and digging the holes for you, for instance, they could write you a document that just says what the value of that is. We don't need to see their hours. Does that make sense, Nicole? Great. I love yes, thank you as a response. Let's see, anybody else? People are hanging out. You must be hanging out because you have questions you want to hear. Let's see, Ryan, do you have any questions? Is that all too much for you?
Yes, it was a lot of information. I'm just waiting to get there. Just send the document so I can review it, as well as the video. And I think I'll be okay. As long as your emails work and I can reach out, I'll be okay.
Okay, good.
Someone
all right.
That says I'm with Ryan.
All right. See ya. Yeah, Mario, glad you could make it. It's a little different than when you did your last grant. I think you'll find some of it a little easier, not having to print out like all those photos and stuff. Yeah, Nicole, you too. I think you'll find some of this a little bit easier than in the past, hopefully.